That's great. Right, Peps. Well, I've got 4 more of your classic threads and snacks that I want to talk about. Next one, I love this one, right? Consistency before challenge. Now, I will tell you now, I have gone wrong big time with this in the past. So before I tell you my kind of past crimes, do you want to just give us a bit of an overview? Why is it important to get the consistency nailed first?
Yeah, so I think whenever you're trying to establish a new habit, whether that's setting up a new whole class questioning routine in your classroom or just trying to do some more exercise in your life, there are a whole bunch of different things that are kind of competing for your resources in those early days, because when you try to put in place a new habit, you're having to put in extra attention basically to make it happen in the way that you want it to make it happen. But then there's all sorts of things in the environment that are also can get in the way. So, for example, if you're putting in a new classroom, a new whole class questioning or discussion routine in the classroom, your pupils will be less familiar with it as well. And if you're trying to establish new habit in running, you might not necessarily know the local area. Though in the local area, you haven't got your watch set up yet, all that kind of stuff. And so basically there's a whole bunch of stuff that can easily thwart the process in the early days. And so one of the best things you can do is really just to take it, be a bit more forgiving, basically, to yourself, and focus on the most important thing, which is just the repetition of the habit. And the danger is that if you try to focus not only on the most important thing, the repetition of the habit, but also the quality of the habit, then essentially everything will potentially fall apart, because you're trying to juggle too many balls. There's a cognitive overload, and you're not meeting your own expectations as well. So there's a damage to ego and cost of failure type effect as well. And you're less likely then to persist. Whereas if you focus more on the consistency end of things at the start, and you focus on just showing up, just going out for a run, just getting that classroom, set of classroom discussion, set of actions that you've just designed up and running. And, they might be a bit rough around the edges, but that doesn't really matter, because soon enough you will have some extra cognitive attention that comes through the process of automation, which happens through repetition, which will enable you to then really start to zoom in on the consistency. So you can start to make that classroom discussion really sharp and quick and fluid and high quality, and you can start to think more about that run and push yourself harder in the moment, rather than worrying about actually showing up.
Love it, love it. So my reflection on this is where I've gone wrong, Peps, on this, right, is there'll be some things that I want to introduce to kids. So a big one for me is diagnostic questions. I love a diagnostic question. I want my kids answering them every single lesson. Another one is I love the task structure of a Venn diagram. I find it really useful for sorting, for categorizing, and so on and so forth, for all different topics of maths. But here's the error I've made, right? So I go straight in day one with a tricky diagnostic question, so the content's hard. Yeah. Or I go straight in day one with a Venn diagram on straight line graphs, where the kids are having to think about the gradient of the graph, the y-intercept, and so on. But the mistake I've made, of course, is not realizing that I want my kids' attention on the content, but of course a big chunk of my kids' attention is also on this unfamiliar task structure. How do they answer the diagnostic question? When do they think about their answer? When do they show me what they think the answer is? When do they discuss with a partner? What do they discuss with a partner? With the Venn diagram, what goes in this region? Forget the content. Well, what does it mean if it's in the intersecting circles and so on and so forth? So a big insight I've taken from your work, and also a conversation I had with Harry Fletcher Wood, was that it's really important to lower the content demands initially whenever the task structure is unfamiliar, and only when the task structure gets more familiar, so kids need to dedicate less attention to it, can you ramp up the content demands. Well, would that be fair, Peps? I haven't missed anything there, have I?
No, that's great. And I think Emma, my partner, also uses, as well as just the content demands, she suggests that you can vary things by the level of familiarity, the kind of the content, the kind of instructional demand of that routine, and the time, how much time I think it ends up taking. So there are various different variables that you can ramp up or reduce in order to create that space for it to bed in the early days.
That's lovely. And again, just a final thing on this. I think that's definitely worth doing if you've got what I call a high value activity structure, something you're going to be using again and again and again. It becomes more problematic, doesn't it, if you're using kind of a one-off task where you're only going to be using it kind of once, and then you get into a whole kinds of trouble because you've then got to explain the task, then the kids have got to think about the task and so on. So a big shift in my teaching over the last few years has been trying to come up with these high value activity structures that I can use again and again, so that if you do lower the content demands initially, it becomes an investment because you're going to be reaping the rewards later, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I think if you're going to be doing something once, you're going to have to justify that hard to yourself.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah.
And this final point from me is that
go for it,
another context in which you see this manifest itself is in the world of coaching, teacher coaching, instructional coaching, because that is or certainly the effective version of instructional coaching is quite complex. There's a lot of different kind of components to it, and there's a whole bunch of like emotional baggage that kind of can like be handled poorly, and so you need to get like trust and relationships and the tone right as well. And so when where schools go wrong is when they say, oh, let's get instructional coaching up and running, and they start with the kind of most complex version they can possibly handle because they think, we owe this to our teachers, we want to do it right, and it tends to like be an absolute disaster. And so often the greatest success stories are those schools that start at the complete opposite end, and they just think like, what is the smallest kind of shape of instructional coaching possible, which is often just what we might call like a positive drop-in, where all you're asking is for a teacher to drop into another teacher's lesson and afterwards send them an email to say, here's a nice thing I saw. And that's it. But from that point, you can gradually build up the habit, the repetition, because it's nice, it's easy to do. And then once you've kind of got that automated and everyone's happy and there's trust present, you can start to add a little bit of constructive criticism with consent, and then you can start to have like more sophisticated feedback conversations, and that whole kind of process can just get more and more and more sophisticated. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of steps to build up.
Lovely. And I love that, perhaps you're a master at this because you've teased our conversation on instructional coaching. Well, I'll have it later, so love it. Great.